This is Tom Bain.
What is this?
This is Wine, Money, and Song. And if you're interested in wine and you want to learn about the best values in wine, please subscribe. So most of the times when we have episodes, I'm here recommending wines that you should be looking for and wines that I have discovered that are great tasting and really great values. And today, what I'm going to be broaching is the 2020 vintage is now hitting the market from California, Oregon, and Washington State. The red wines are hitting. And there was a problem in 2020, if we remember, that there were many wildfires and there was a lot of destruction up and down the California coast, winemaking areas, Oregon, Washington State. There were multiple blazes. If you remember, these wildfires are tied to the drought, the long-term droughts. And a lot of the vineyards are in areas that are tinderboxes. And these occurrences are going to be much more often than we've seen in the past. In 2017, there were a lot of wildfires. 2020, which I'm going to talk about today, really the most horrible wildfires that they've seen in memory in California and right along the Pacific coast. And of course, last year, 2022, tons of fires. And this is something that the wine industry has to learn to adapt to. So first, in 2020, the fires started in August and September. The LNV complex fire occurred in Napa, Sonoma, Lake County, and other areas. And smoke hung in the air. There was a lot of damage, and people didn't know what to do. So they were struggling with that because the grapes weren't in yet. And the grapes were just going through Verizon, which is the Verizon, which is the changing of the color of the grapes. They were beginning to change color from green to red. And that's a very pivotal moment. But what happened in the end of September, you had the glass fire. And the glass fire burnt down wineries, very, very bad in Napa and Sonoma. Burned down a number of wineries. I know Newton burned down, and Newton was a beautiful winery and had recently been bought out by Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, and they haven't owned it in a long time, and it's just burned to the ground. Beautiful winery, totally lost in other wineries all over the place. So just to understand the amount of damage that was done, $601 million is estimated losses for the grape growers. And the total market for grape growing in the California, Napa Sonoma area is 3.25. So that's a large, that is a large loss. Thomas Rivers Brown and Philip Mika, who are consultants for some of the largest and most prestigious wineries in Napa and Sonoma, basically said that only 20% of the grapes in those areas were going to be bottled. And that is a huge loss just right there in numbers. And something like of the 35,000 acres, almost 1,500 acres were not going to be used at all. And that's a big quandary for wineries. Now, we're going to go into defining what smoke damage is and how the wineries made their decisions in making wines and not making wines. So as I go into defining the damage and categorizing it, and my conclusion at the end on what you should do, but I want to go through what kind of chaotic time it was for the wineries in 2020. As I said, these multiple blazes were burning all up and down Napa Sonoma, and smoke. You would have the fire, and you would think where the fire is, that's where the damage is, the big damage. And usually the smoke would drift for miles and miles and then settle somewhere. And sometimes the smoke settled for 3 months. And most of the damage comes from the smoke. And defining which grapes had smoke taint and didn't is not very easy. Just think about it. You had all these fires, and they were occurring late August, September, and then the glass fire, September 27th, which is some of the wines were picked already, but there were still others that were not picked. And some of the wineries, when they saw the fires start to happen, they picked early. They picked before the grapes were ripe, just to save them so they could have a crop to bottle. So you can see each winery made different choices. Now, Philip Mika said that a lot of his people were not going to bottle the vintage. And they didn't say that publicly because they didn't want to put pressure on their neighbors who might make wines that were damaged, and did not want to put pressure on them by saying, I'm not making it because the quality is not going to be high enough for my standards, but it's high enough for your standards. And they don't go there. You never throw mud in a vineyard. And so it was a personal decision, but you have to understand that this is the wine business. And there are some well-heeled wineries who could just rebuild. As I said, wineries burnt down and they were devastated. And some people have the money to rebuild and put them back up. But there are people who live vintage to vintage. And growers especially need to make money every year. They're farmers. They farm grapes and they sell it to wineries, and they need to sell their wines. And there were instances of Napa and Sonoma vintners not buying any of the grapes that they were contracted for, but part of the contract when you buy grapes is the quality of the grapes, and there's a sliding scale. And a lot of these grapes had smoke tint and taint. And they didn't have to buy them by contract. But what some of them did is they gave, instead of paying the $3,500, $3,700 a ton, they didn't take any of it, but they paid them the growers $1,500 a ton that they had to throw out. And that's a way of being a good neighbor and trying to keep the growers in business. So it was really a crazy, crazy time for the California wine industry, Oregon, and Washington State. Now, I'm talking mainly about California because they're so large, but I know that some of the wines in Oregon, some of the Chardonnay, and usually the taint affects red wines much more than white wines because the taint gets on the skins and passes through the skins. And when you crush the grapes and you ferment and you squeeze the skins, that smoke elements come out into the wine. Most white wines do not see a lot of skin contact. So generally, it's mainly red wines. Now, I know a lot of wineries decided instead of making red wines, they made more rosé because it only gently squeezed the skins a little bit, and thus avoiding getting a lot of that smoke taint. So how did the wineries make this decision of whether to bottle or not bottle? And how do you get rid of smoke taint? I don't think you get rid of it, but you find a way of mitigating it. So when all these fires occurred, these hundreds of wineries lined up to have their grapes tested. And there were not enough companies who could handle the volume. They said in 2 or 3 weeks you can test it. Once you pick your grapes, you have to squeeze them. You have to squeeze them. So people, if they picked the grapes, they had to make the grapes, they had to squeeze the grapes, or they had to throw them out. That's it. Or sell them off in bulk. Sell them off in bulk. And what happened with the testing, certain grapes would test negative for the smoke taint. So the wineries went ahead, squeezed the grapes, made the wines, and then the finished wines tested positive for smoke taint. Now, is smoke taint a killer? Meaning that if there's any smoke taint in the wine, you can't drink it? No, but a lot of the damage was so strong that you couldn't even make wine out of it. So if you have some smoke taint in the wine, how perceptible is it? So the rationale for a lot of wineries who made wine was, we had a slight bit of smoke taint, but it was imperceptible to the average consumer. Now, if I'm a winery and I have built up a great name in my winery, that I built it into a brand and it's very prestigious, am I going to play around with that and bring an inferior product that has that smoke taint in it? It's a business, so it's a very tough decision. And some people morally made the right choice, and the other people made a commercial choice by making wines or selling off the wines. I'm not going to say who was right and who was wrong, but when I worked for Diageo, back in the 90s, I think it was, they had problems with TCA taint. They had redone the winery, BV, Beaulieu Vineyards, and they had put some fire retardant wood sealer on the walls and of the reconditioned winery, and somehow the aromas of the finish on the walls was volatile, and it actually worked its way into the barrels of wine, and the wines were tested for TCA, and the Wine Spectator ran a story that BV Wines had this TCA tint. So we sat down as a company. Now, I didn't make the final choice, but they asked me what I thought. And I said, well, if you have this taint and you can taste it, I wouldn't bottle the wines. I'd sell them off. But after days of having Madison Avenue people involved and marketers, marketing people and everything, they decided to bottle the wines, sell them as usual. And the bottom line was, it would hurt earnings in that quarter if they didn't bottle these wines. Now, when the wines were finished, I tasted them. I tasted the TCA taint. Was it horrible? A person like me who's experienced, I could taste it. But this is a business, and everyone's got to make their decisions. So after I said all these wines got tested and everything, and everyone made their decisions, and as I said, the red wines were really affected more than the white wines. So what's the conclusion of this? What I say to the wine-consuming public is, be very, very careful with 2020 red wines, especially from California, from Oregon, and Washington State. What I would do is I would taste them first, and if you like them, go buy them. As for myself, I know that 2018 and 2019 in California was very plentiful, and there's still wines left over. And the 2020s, the harvest is very small because they had to throw out a lot. And to me, why am I going to chance it unless I taste it? So buyer beware. Taste those wines first. And I know some of these wineries made outstanding wines, but are you willing to take the chance on spending your hard-earned money on a very questionable vintage, unless you know for a fact that these are not fire and smoke involved? So I'm going to leave you with this last thought. To buy or not to buy, that is the question, and I will leave you with that.